Hi, welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest today is Laurie Lacey, who writes about things of the natural world and things of the spirit. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Good to have you here. Now, in your book, Medicine Walk, you write about this idea of reconnecting to the earth. I guess my first question would be, how did we get disconnected?
Many ways. I think it happens so gradually, and in a sense it's an individual thing. I mean, you may be connected and I may be disconnected, but over time I think as we gradually, well, I think it largely began with the industrial age. You know, people get out of the fields and like in Europe and out of farming into the factories, and that was, I think, in the Western Hemisphere, that was one of the main factors. And of course, more recently with technology, we tend to spend more time behind a computer screen and things like that in our, work days.
It sure is easy to remove ourselves from basic natural things because there's so much busyness out there to take over.
As I say, it can happen and you don't really realize it. You know, it's like suddenly it's like everything else. I mean, a teacher, for example, in school, spends 7 hours in school, comes home, does homework for 3 hours, and suddenly it's time for bed, and there's just no time for anything else, and it happens all across the board.
Okay, so you would say it's important to simply carve out time to make these reconnections, and a big part of it in your book, at least, is the concept of the medicine walk. Could you define that?
Yeah, well, it's good to, first of all, to carve out, I'd say at least even 10-15 minutes to take a walk or do something involving the natural world. But the whole concept of a medicine walk has many facets to it. For many years I've been involved in the study of native cultures. And I guess the roots of my concept of a medicine walk grows out of my love for native culture. And it's basically something involving going out, taking a walk, or being led by a person such as myself, and clearing your mind of any stress you might have, anything you might, your job, any thoughts about your job or whatever, and focusing entirely on the moment, on the walk, involving yourself physically, taking the walk, mentally by clearing your mind and taking in the impressions from the natural environment, and spiritually through that connecting to the earth.
It takes practice to do that, doesn't it? Because the mind is flooded with so much of everything.
It takes a lot of practice. But we have to begin somewhere, and but even even the busiest person, not just physically, but the person whose mind is really always working, always thinking. I find that when they're out walking, and they tend to calm down to a certain extent, and that's good. And if you do it often enough, you'll eventually come to really love taking walks, and you'll have a more serene approach to your whole life.
Okay, you write about how trees, rocks, and birds, moss even, has the ability to heal somehow.
Yeah.
Could you explore that a bit?
Well, of course, chemically, trees and plants have chemicals in, I mean, from a base, physical level that can heal. But I think also that there's much more to that. For example, I believe very much that everything is alive, and plants, trees, rocks, they have energy in them. Of course, they holding the molecules together, or even science admits that. But I believe it goes deeper than that. I believe we can connect consciously to impressions coming from the plants. For example, this is a good illustration. If you go to a group of pine trees, by a lake, and you hear the breeze blowing through the pine trees, and you hear this incredible hum, well, if you calm and relax yourself right there, it will be very healing. And also, aside from that, I believe that in such a situation as a group of pines, I think there's an aura, there's an atmosphere from the life forces of the pines that can be very beneficial to a person.
Is this something you've been training yourself to be able to do over the years?
Yeah, I tend to feel things a lot. And some people, for example, the people who started, I don't know if you've heard about the Findhorn Foundation, they've actually, some of those people actually have seen little beings, you can call them what you like, maybe the leprechauns from Ireland, beings that assist plant growth, for example.
Oh yeah.
But the way I approach things is from a pure energy perspective, that there is energy there and it can interact with the energy, your own energy field, and create a very harmonious atmosphere.
How's a person sort of cultivate the patience and the ability to observe In other words, to break down the normal traits that we've learned from keeping up our activities in the organized society.
Many ways. Well, one of the best ways, of course, is through concentration and meditation exercises. Even, as I mentioned earlier, 10 minutes a day, you know, that can be plenty. And it's not easy, of course, but, you know, if you do it over and over, and one of the main things I stress is regularity. Choose exercises in my book. You might enjoy 2 or 3 of them, and just do them regularly, and you'll be amazed at how much you do. Your mind does calm down and slow down, and then you'll start to love it. So you'll make that extra effort, and you'll take the time to take maybe 15 minutes, half an hour, and do something. Just forget everything else. Say, to hell with it, you know, with all this work, with all these other issues, and say, you know, I need a half an hour for myself, and I'm going to enjoy it in the natural landscape, and go and do it.
Is there a religious basis for these ideas? Have you borrowed from many different places, or especially from Mi'kmaq religion and tradition?
Yeah, well, in this book, my earlier book, Mi'kmaq Medicine, of course, I was totally based on the Mi'kmaq stuff. But yes, there are many elements of native culture coming into this, and also some Buddhism, and I'm a big fan of Nicholas Roerich, who was a Buddhist person who journeyed through Tibet and the Himalayas.
So it's an eclectic thing. It's not a specific religious
an eclectic
organization
thing,
or anything. Yep.
Although I must admit, back of it all, there's a lot of this native perspective.
Yeah, you seem to be borrowing from the ideas of the shamans. What maybe you could talk a little bit about what a shaman was in times past, and maybe who they are today.
Well, to a certain extent, I have. I mean, although I in no way, and I stress this, that this book, Medicine Walk, is in no way like a shamanistic manual or claiming to be or representative of native shamanism.
What did the traditional shaman do?
The traditional shaman, and this even comes out in Mi'kmaq culture, the early Jesuit priests stressed the fact that, and this was in 1700, stressed the fact that the shaman was a physician, the shaman was a you know, often a chief as well, and a doctor, a psychiatrist, everything put together. The shaman was at the center of the native worldview and controlled the worldview to a certain extent. So the shaman healed basically with plants on a physical level, and using plants too mentally, and then on a spiritual level through shamanic journeying. So the shaman was at the very center of the native belief system, native spirituality, and so all-encompassing really, a doctor and a priest.
Kind of pushed that aside with modern medicine and science and other things, I suppose, didn't we?
Yeah, although, mind you, if you really do research, you would be amazed at how much, like, for example, psychiatry has borrowed from traditional shamanism in its analysis of.
Sure, that's right, of even like a sense of wholeness and trying to get away from the fragmentation.
Exactly. Reconnecting,
as you say in your book. You write in this book and in some of your other books that I've read about harvesting edible wild plants. I've always been really interested in edible wild plants. First time I moved to Nova Scotia, I read a bunch of books about them, and I realized that I could live at least for a whole summer without any money. I could just eat these things that grew out of the ground. Of course, people laughed at me. They thought I was crazy, and I found my way back to store-bought food, but I do kind of miss that.
So you actually attempted this?
Yeah, and I had my favorites, cattails, for example.
Oh, okay. I mean,
cattails are great. These are not the tails of cats, folks. These are, they're also called bulrushes.
Delicious.
They grow all across North America. There's something for you that would be part of that philosophy, other than just sort of eating something and becoming full and not being hungry. There's more to it, isn't there, in the harvesting?
Oh yeah. For example. But one thing I'd always like to stress out too is there's always the danger of over-harvesting. And sometimes I wonder, going out and giving field walks, whether I'm doing a good thing or a bad thing. I don't want somebody to go out and pick all the gold thread in existence. But there is more to that for me. It's something just being with the plants. I mean, I get a thrill out of, for example, and often I'll do that. I'll pick out a plant that's quite rare, and then I'll go out and try to find it. And the very effort of trying to find it is good therapy. So the thrill to me often is just finding it, and perhaps sampling a leaf or a piece of the root. Now, mind you, a lot of wild foods are not very tasty, as far as I'm concerned.
You can pick and choose, though.
You can.
But you would say like each one has a different kind of spirit, and then
Right,
that goes
exactly.
back to that
Different kind of
Mi'kmaq
energy and
medicine
spirit.
connection.
For example, one of my favorites is the wood sorrel. Very nice, kind of a lemonish, sweet,
Yeah,
sweet
I've
sour.
tasted that. A little
tasting
green,
thing.
almost clover leaf kind of thing that grows on the floor of the forest. Yeah, and it's sour and it's
Yeah, it's
kind of
one of my
interesting.
favorites. And you can just, reach down, pick a leaf, and chew it. And
There you go.
it's,
And that's part of a meditative practice in a way. For
oh,
you, isn't it?
exactly. And part of the thing I stress is that, and the native people stress this too. When they would go look for a medicine, they would perhaps the first sample of that plant they came to, they would perhaps give an offering of tobacco and say a prayer to it, and then they would move on to the next. And before they collected, they would move on to the next sample of plants.
What other common plants were used for medical purposes by
So
Mi'kmaq
many.
people?
It was, for example, Indian turnip or jack in the pulpit, a very sacred plant. It's called a Mi'kmaq segabon, and it was considered almost like a panacea and a preventive too. Some of the older people would wear a piece of the root perhaps on them or keep some in the house to keep away illness. Of course, the famous sweetgrass. Then you get into gold thread, burdock, so many.
Did they work as cures for ailments?
Yeah, many of them.
And did they work because the individual believed that it would work, or has it been proven in many cases medically? Or does it matter if there's a difference between the two?
Sometimes I wonder if it matters because, if it works, it works. But a combination of both. It's the same thing in mainstream medicine. You walk into a doctor's office, he's dressed in this white gown, and already he puts you, or intends to put you in the mood that, boy, I'm going to heal you, So already the psychological thing's going. And it was the same with native shamanism. They used the psychological thing, or native healers did. But that was only part of it. The other part was the actual healing properties of the plant. Something like gold thread, for example. It's been proven in labs right here in Dalhousie University, actually in Halifax. Tests were done and proving Mi'kmaq remedies, native remedies. For example, the use of it to treat sore eyes or sores in the mouth.
So, scientifically
Sure,
proven
scientifically proven.
Before we leave this part of the show go, tell me just a little bit more about the meditative kinds of practices. You document several different ones that have to do with just like sitting by a stream, listening to the water, or listening to the sound of the wind in the trees, or observing the clouds. Yeah,
any element in nature can be used, I think, to enhance us spiritually. Nature is there for that, I'm convinced. The beauty of nature is there to enhance us. But I talk also about walking meditations, focusing on your footsteps as you walk. Straight meditative exercises, which could involve mental imagery as well, visualization, using the wind, the trees, birds as well. I have a neat one in there about the use of the crow for as a meditative practice. Find a crow and just observe the crow.
Yes.
And learn from the crow and learn what kind. Well, if you've ever watched a crow sit in a tree for any length of time, you'll see them observing, moving their heads, and they're very patient creatures. And I think if we meditate on a crow doing that, we can also learn to be more observant and more patient, and we can improve our concentration.
So mere observation changes the observer. You walk into the forest and you find a really interesting tree.
Right.
You stand there, and what would you do?
Oh, well, in some cases, there's lots of things you can do. There's a really neat exercise where you can go up and you can, just close your eyes and feel the texture of the bark and record all the sensations you can through that texture. Feel the leaves, and then open your eyes and do it visually to compare the visual with the simple feeling. Or you can just sit by the trunk of the tree and close your eyes, relax, and focus on the tree for about a minute, then let your mind go blank and see what impressions come into you.
When you explain this to people, do you find a lot of non-believers, in a sense?
Oh, they think
people
I'm in
look
left
at you.
field.
Give me a break.
Yes, but I don't worry about that. I used to worry about that quite a bit. But it's just me.
You know what the effect is.
Yeah, it's just me, and I know what the effect is. And I find my whole life since I've been involved with plants since 1974, and things just keep changing. Life is a medicine walk, as far as I'm concerned, and it's a never-ending thing. And this is where I am now.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. My guest today is Laurie Lacey, and we're talking about reconnecting to the earth. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Off the Page. My guest today is Laurie Lacey. We've been talking about the Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia, and you've learned a lot and brought many ideas into your books that borrow heavily from their tradition. Could you tell us a bit about who the Mi'kmaq were before the arrival of Western settlers? What kind of people were they?
They were people that, well, first of all, they're part of the Algonquin family of people, like the Cree, or the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy down through the U.S. They were basically a people that moved with the seasons to a large extent, hunting, gathering, meeting periodically for grand councils. And they occupied they occupied what is today presently the Maritime Provinces, Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, and a part of Maine as well. Now there is some dispute as to how long they've been in Newfoundland. Some people say that they shared Newfoundland traditionally with the Beothuk people, and others say that they arrived lately. But their tradition in Newfoundland certainly does go back a long way. So basically, that type of people, they moved inland in the winter, and they would hunt for moose, and they would hunt for collect furs to a certain extent.
And obviously very connected to the natural world around them because it was their survival.
Yeah, and many of their ceremonies were based on appeasing the spirits of nature, and before they would go on to hunt, or before they would kill something, perhaps they would offer prayer if it was a moose to the moose spirit, and thank the moose for the offering of meat and the bone and the flesh. And
how did you do your research when you were gathering information for your books?
Well, I started getting permission from the Mi'kmaq Association of Cultural Studies, which at that time was based up in Shubenacadie. At the time, I didn't have a car, so I basically thumbed my way around from community to community, had many great experiences, talked with a lot of elders, some young people as well, throughout Nova Scotia, into New Brunswick, some over to Newfoundland. And basically, at the time, I had no idea that it would evolve to the point that it has at the present time. I mean, I did it, basically I was studying anthropology at Dalhousie, and it was for an honors thesis. But I mean, it's just become part of my life. And
became your life work.
Yeah, exactly, and it's amazing how things develop like that.
In another one of your books, Black Spirit, you write about crows, and a pet crow in particular named Spirit. I wonder if you could introduce us to your friend.
Okay, this crow was well, first my brother found this crow driving the 103 west of Halifax. So he, a car had struck the crow, and he was badly beaten up. I mean, bruised. The vet said, well, perhaps he'll live maybe a week, maybe a month. So my brother kept him for a couple of months, but he lives basically in a subdivision, and so he figured, well, if this crow gets better and starts flying around, he can be pretty mischievous, to the neighbors. So he asked me if I would take him, and of course I jumped at this. The reason I jumped at it was because having studied native culture, I knew, or I know that the crow is a trickster.
And ravens,
and then a special bird. So wow, I thought, here's my chance to live with a trickster. So I took the crow and nursed him back to health. He never did get, to the point where I could release. I mean, I don't believe in keeping a wild bird if they can be released. But this crow, its feet were so battered up that it couldn't perch on a tree, you see. In fact, once I had to rescue the crow from a tree, which is quite an embarrassment to a crow. But
what did he teach you?
Oh, lots of things. He taught me patience. He taught me that the communication, I mean, up until that point, I think, I had met a lot of animals in the wild, and of course I had a dog and a cat. But I had no idea that other creatures, especially birds, could be so intelligent. And
it's a different kind of intelligence, of course.
Yeah, and the communication was almost often nonverbal, and I got to learn a lot about crow behavior. How, I mean, for example, often if they flap their wings really fast, it means that they're going to probably approach you and want, some loving, caring, or
some food.
food perhaps. And I learned a lot of things about crows. It's so hard to sum up.
So again, it's like learning different things from nature. Now, I had a pet raven myself for a long while, and I called him Jack. I noticed that Jack and Joe seem to be common names you give for. This is a huge raven I found down by the ocean, and I came to the conclusion that he was telepathic, which will probably not surprise you at all. But people out there may not believe this. An amazing creature. Once that kind of connection was made, and he,
And they express themselves emotionally, don't they? I mean.
Oh, very expressive.
Playful,
and playful and useful, and you gather together some great stories in your book there.
Yeah.
I guess most folks still don't have those opportunities to reconnect with a bird or a tree or a rock or all these things that a lot of folks are going to say, well, that's just kind of foolish. I have more important things to do. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about that. Obviously, they're missing out on something. What about people living in the heart of the city, especially? Right there in the concrete world where nature has been pushed so far away, what do they do?
Well, like take Halifax for example. I mean, certainly Point Pleasant Park, and if you live in an urban area or a city with a nice park, well, go there and observe the birds, look at the plants, and if there's one plant you care for in particular, go sit by that plant, and weekly, just try it. Just go sit by the plant weekly. Close your eyes, observe its texture, learn as much as you can by reading books about that plant. If you're, if you don't have the advantage of a park, well, if you live in a high-rise apartment, well, perhaps you can start a little small garden, get a few favorite plants in, and take time and put up perhaps, a really nice, almost a sanctum around the plant, a nice space where you can relax and sit by the plant.
Sounds like that Japanese kind of a thing. People who live in cities in Japan cultivate small places of nature.
Learn to take advantage of every square foot that you have and devote a few, a little bit of space to plants, or garden a little, grow some lettuce, some sprouts, and start and observe the birds that fly and may sit near your apartment. Small things like that. Try to get out into the country, but it has to start with you, the person. I mean, nobody can. Nature therapy is the oldest thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, we do it, and we don't know anything about it. It's just I've written this book so that maybe to give people a kick.
Sounds like good advice. We're going to take another short break, and we'll be back in a few seconds. Hi, you've been watching Off the Page today. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest is Laurie Lacey, and he's the author of Medicine Walk and Black Spirit and a few other books. Laurie, just here at the very tail end of the show, could you take me to one of your special sacred places?
Well, west of Bridgewater, near where I live, is the Leipzig Goldfields. And there's a very special place there in Leipzig Lake. There's a small point coming out with like a bluff. And that's where I pick cranberries, which is very therapeutic. And I often go and sit in that bluff and look across the lake, especially in the fall, at all the fall leaves, and focus on that and just close my eyes and relax. And so that's a very special place to me.
Okay, thank you for taking us there. And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time. Bye.
Thanks.